Can y'all hear me better with this? Hello? Oh, okay, for the live stream. Perfect. So, so yeah, we've been working on this resiliency plan for a little over a year now. Um, it all started because the Moss Point zip code area, as a result of Hurricane Zeta and Ida, the state recognized there was a need, unmet needs that were created because of that storm in those areas, as well as other areas across the coast. And so they gave that area some funding, CDBG disaster recovery funding, to help with reducing the effects of flooding in the area. That's the main problem that they had after hurricanes and storms. But a portion of that funding had to be spent on mitigation efforts. So sort of like planning ahead to help prevent those types of damages from happening again when we have future storms. And so it was the county's task to manage those mitigation effort funds. It was about 15% of the total funds that went towards that effort. And so we're managing those funds. We chose to do two plans to start that effort with, one of those being this countywide resiliency plan, which is, meets that goal of a mitigation effort perfectly, because that's exactly what we're trying to do here, is to build a plan that makes the county be more resilient in the face of natural disasters and just other kinds of disasters we see, and climate change effects and that sort of thing. So so the ladies here are going to give us a lot more details on what we've done over the course of the year to create this plan, but essentially that's what it's meant to do. I mean, it was kind of enlightening for me as we were going through the process, and kind of already knew this going into it, but I feel like Jackson County is already doing a pretty good job of being resilient and overcoming natural disasters. But it never hurts to, bring in professionals that do this, as their career, to identify even more ways that we can improve or things that we may not be thinking about. So we went through a selection process once we received those funds, and the team that we selected was Neil Schaefer in partnership with the Water Institute. So that's who's been developing this plan in conjunction with us. And so I'm going to turn it over to Abby to give us some more details on it.
Great. Hit the lights, yeah, thank you, so we can see it better. All right. Thanks everybody so much for coming tonight. We're excited to talk to you about where we are with the resiliency plan. Really the objectives of this public meeting today, provide residents, you all, with an understanding of the purpose, and also introduce the plan's components, so what you can expect to see when the plan is released to the public, and then also allow time to answer your questions about the resiliency plan. We have some of the actions and sub-actions that will be featured in the plan. They're about 85%, I would say, of the way there. A couple things might be tweaked between now and when it gets released, but once we finish going through this presentation, folks are welcome to walk around after the Q&A to these stations. We'll be standing over there, happy to answer any questions that you might have about those, and then then we will wrap up around 7. Let me just, there we go. Okay, must have timed out. But just a little bit of information about the project. Matthew already kind of ran through the funding source from a community development block grant. And there are additional funds that will be used to pilot or test a recommended project. So you won't see that in the posters today, but that will be something that's featured in the plan, a recommended project to be tested. And then the county was also recently awarded funding for a shoreline assessment, which will go even deeper into thinking about what are the actual physical kind of shoreline interventions that may work in different parts of the county along the shoreline for protection. Okay, so why a countywide resiliency plan? We know there are lots of opportunities for growth within the county, but we also know we need to balance those with addressing changing risks. So these are just some photos from, some extreme rainfall events. We know that erosion is a chronic stressor in the county. Picture of a living shoreline that was implemented along the coast. And a countywide resiliency plan can do lots of different things. I would say probably our actions touch on all of these, but improving coordination and collaboration, whether it's between the county, interdepartmental, or also between the county and cities. So everyone's working together, ensure the county is proactively addressing hazards, saving the county money, and unlocking new investments. So a plan like this can set the county up for future funding as well. I don't know what's going on with this. Maggie, I may need you to wiggle the mouse so in case this happens again. And so we started out with a vision and goals. We had public meetings over the summer. We also brought in a group of local experts from various different fields and departments within the county to help develop this vision and goals. Looked at vulnerability and risk, so I'll talk about that in just a second, and then really outlined some opportunities that we then brought back to the public, brought back to the local experts in the county to help us prioritize those actions, and that's what you'll see in the back there. So this is just showing kind of all the stakeholder engagement. We've been highly engaged with the Board of Supervisors. They'll be briefed on this, and they'll be able to review the plan in about a month as well. So what are the components? What can you expect to see in the plan? Like I mentioned, the vision and goals. Also, we'll talk a little bit about how changing hazards are specifically impacting Jackson County and coastal Mississippi. And then the main kind of, I would say like the meat of the plan is really talking about those resiliency action areas, which we have a map in the back that's describing those, which I'll talk about in a second. And then also the actions and sub-actions, which are also in the back. What you see in the back is just a list, but there will be, lots of information under each of those in the plan. And then an implementation section, so to support the county in thinking about how are we actually going to achieve these actions. And I'll say Matthew and Brian at the county are very effective at their jobs, but a lot of these, the order that they come in, I would say, is going to depend on funding. It's going to depend on lots of different things. So I would expect some things to probably be implemented in the near term, and then some things will obviously take longer and require, diverse funding sources. So in developing a vision and goals, like I mentioned, we talked to the public, we talked to local experts, we did an assessment of all the plans that already exist, make sure we weren't duplicating efforts, and really came up with these 3 goals that we heard from folks and from the public and from our local experts. So improving resiliency of the shoreline and waterways, including the people, infrastructure, and ecology around them, guiding safe and strategic development and economic growth, and then strengthening access to resources and services for residents before, during, and after extreme events. And that's kind of how the actions are categorized in the back. And then the hazards we focus on, we know that there are more hazards than just this list, but these were really the highest priority ones that you'll see in the plan. So intensifying storms, things like tropical depressions, hurricanes, and tornadoes, flooding, so coastal, rainfall, riverine, and compound flooding when you have 2 or more of those flood sources occurring at the same time, erosion, extreme heat, and then cold weather. And so the action areas, this is the same map that's in the back, just different colors. But the purpose of this is not a regulatory map by any means. This was for the planning team and also to support the county in implementing some of these actions. So the reason we put this together are to think about, okay, where are different areas in the county experiencing different challenges, and how can we apply actions spatially in a way that makes sense? Because we know, a challenge on the immediate shoreline might be a little bit different from challenges that are occurring above I-10. So there are some similar challenges, but some are different. So we kind of parse the county out. These are not rigid boundaries, but we wanted to define each area's characteristics, their unique hazards and risks, and then determine, like I mentioned, those appropriate actions for each area. So the first one is the immediate shoreline. Obviously, this is where land and water meet. We know there are lots of economic opportunities here, ecological benefits, and there are varied uses. There's public areas, there's also industrial uses. Folks live along the shoreline as well, and then there's those conservation areas. And the risks here, we probably all know them, some of the highest levels of hazard exposure, especially from storm surge, wave action, high winds that can cause flooding and infrastructure damage. And over time, erosion is heavily impacting this area. And so this causes a greater risk to infrastructure, homes, businesses, and those ecologically important areas. High winds is also a risk here as well and can potentially cut residents off from services. But then when we think about the resiliency opportunities in this area, we have to think about, there are varying physical and ownership characteristics along the shoreline, so that makes a difference when we think about where to apply certain actions. And we know that there should be different types of interventions in different places, and that's one thing. That's a reason why I think the county wanted to make sure that they're really focusing on the shoreline, especially in that shoreline assessment, so we can make those recommendations there. There's also a suite of shoreline interventions that the county can pursue. So you'll see these in the plan. You won't see that a living shoreline should go in this exact area, but you'll see there's kind of a suite of options they can choose from, whether it's more natural interventions, but also targeted hardened infrastructure where needed. And then we have these coastal urban areas. So Ocean Springs, Gaucher, Moss Point, Pascagoula, the cities, where we have a lot of population density, and there are overlapping jurisdictions here, as we know, so it's important to consider that when applying different actions here. And then we know a lot of the county's important resources, services, small businesses, and a lot of the cultural activities are concentrated here. They're largely already developed. That was important to consider, and there's aging infrastructure here as well. Hazards and risks, we know that compound flooding is an issue here, so when you see flooding from multiple sources, storm surge and high tides combined with heavy rainfall, and that we know that can overwhelm drainage systems. There's also strong hurricane and tropical storm winds that can pose a significant threat here. And then we know that there are certain pockets where there are older homes and mobile housing that can be particularly vulnerable. And then the dense development near the waterways can actually reduce absorption when wetlands are replaced with more wetlands and permeable surfaces are replaced with pavement and rooftops that can increase runoff and might call for stormwater interventions. And so some resiliency opportunities here, modernizing and improving the resiliency of the aging infrastructure to support stormwater management, water, power, and communications access. And then we have various stormwater actions that you'll see in the back, and that's just kind of scratching the surface. The plan has a lot more detail about each of them because there are several strategies. But then strengthening building codes, which is something that's ongoing at the county level, supporting residents with that are interested in home retrofits in alignment with those codes. And then improving resiliency of transportation, supporting coordination between the county, the cities, and other organizations and agencies that help contribute to disaster preparedness and recovery as well. So these are kind of the resiliency opportunities in the coastal urban areas. And then we, of course, know that we have the coastal industry, and we know that Pascagoula is not the only place with coastal industry, but this is where it's heavily concentrated, so this is where we're focused on the plan. But we know these major industrial areas that are along the coast employ people not just who live in the county, but also from outside of the county, so important consideration when thinking about what actions apply in this area. We are all familiar probably with the industries here and know that they're important drivers within the county, so important to make sure that those areas are resilient, during sunny days, but also after a storm. And then we have hazards and risks for coastal industry right up on the shoreline, so risk of multiple types of flooding as well. Strong coastal winds can pose risks to buildings, equipment, power systems, and we know that hazards can actually go beyond physical damage because they can trigger economic disruptions and employment impacts, so really important areas to protect. And then, of course, presence of hazardous materials, want to make sure that mitigating against any sort of environmental contamination during flooding or storm events, because there are adjacent communities in that area as well. So thinking about resiliency opportunities here, protection for critical facilities, making sure the county is in close coordination with industrial partners. A lot of the industry, protects themselves, but it's important that there's coordination there and thinking about where the county may play a role in strategic investments along the shoreline for industry as well. And then, so keeping that sustained coordination, we had a great meeting with industry partners back before the holidays, and one thing we heard about was pre-hurricane convenings to support response and recovery. So you'll see some actions related to these points in the plan. And then we have the rural and suburban coastal areas. There's two more, and then I'll get to the actions. But these are mostly, older single-family homes, but there are pockets for sure of new residential development. a little bit further away from the city centers and the corresponding resources. And then we have the conservation areas and other undeveloped lands that help support flood storage and other important ecological functions. And the hazards and risks here, you know, like many of the other places, there are multiple sources of flood risk, from storm surge, riverine overflow, and heavy rainfall. So there can be compounding effects, which increases flood depths and extents. And we also know that in these areas, some transportation networks like roads are more vulnerable to disruption. So especially in neighborhoods where there might be like a single or minimal point of entry, we want to make sure that those folks aren't getting cut off especially during like heavy rainfall events. So that is one point related to hazards there. And then we know that, you know, these areas are also exposed to hurricane winds, which can cause structural damage and power disruption. So that's really what we're thinking about for these areas. And then framing the opportunities here. One thing is we know development is still happening in these areas. Want to make sure that the development that is happening, we're minimizing the impact of new development on existing communities and infrastructure. And also, like I mentioned, focusing on those key access and evacuation roads, building connections to key city centers and resources, and then using green space that exists in these areas really strategically for valuable resilience benefits like reducing flood risk. And then finally, we have the inland rural areas. So this is, you know, huge part of the county, but, you know, not as dense of population. So we have lower population density, large areas of undeveloped or agricultural land. We know that infrastructure and services are more limited here than in the urban or coastal areas. Lots of residents rely on septic, rural road networks, and we know that even though it's lower density, development is rapidly increasing in this area, and the county's growing, which is a good thing, but I think this plan can help support the county in making, you know, resilient growth decisions. So want to make sure that open spaces are, you know, continuing to support natural drainage and flood storage and wildlife habitat, and that is not lost, you know, while still facilitating smart development. Some hazards and risks. There's less exposure to coastal flooding, but one thing I think that my teammates and I learned is that even, you know, coastal events, even though they seemingly don't directly impact this area, that we still see some impacts, you know, with the river and especially combined with rainfall. And there are wind-related hazards here. Many residents in these areas rely on septic, like we mentioned. So this can result in service disruptions when there's flooding, water quality challenges, as we've seen even recently. And then these areas are further away from critical resources and services, which can be exacerbated if there's extreme flooding or hazards. So making sure that we're considering that when thinking about which actions apply in this area as well. So a couple resiliency opportunities here, balancing future development and new construction with land conservation by guiding growth towards less flood-prone areas, promoting resilient building practices, implementing clustered land development, which is something the county is already doing, fostering increased connectivity to existing resources, and also investing in additional infrastructure and services to support future development and development that's currently ongoing in the inland rural areas. And I heard we have a celebrity in the room in that photo. All right, so resiliency actions and sub-actions. I'm not going to spend a ton of time because we have them in the back and you'll see these in the plan, but we have them categorized into 3 categories: the future of the shoreline and infrastructure, resilient growth, and then access to services, like I mentioned at the beginning. I'm going to run through them, and then we'll have some time for Q&A, and I believe we have for the live stream, if you have questions, we won't be able to answer them in real time, but if you email them to the address that was shared on Facebook, we're happy to follow up in the coming days. So we have action 1, which is mitigate current and future shoreline erosion. And so the action is really like the broad action that the county can take, what we want to achieve. And then the sub-actions are those kind of mechanisms. How can we get this done? And then in the plan, under each sub-action, there will be lots of text to follow of like, how can this actually be implemented? So we have identify and support the placement of buffers between the shoreline and development to protect existing coastal assets, explore and leverage innovative shoreline preservation measures like sand motors, jetties, levees to replenish shoreline in targeted areas of the county, encourage the use of living shorelines to reduce wave energy and erosion on private property, prioritize beneficial use of dredge sediment to mitigate erosion, investing in strategic hardening, like we mentioned, along the shoreline that considers critical infrastructure and key activities, considering different policy mechanisms to support marsh restoration, replenishment, and maintenance, and then promoting the expansion of locally produced native plant materials to maximize the efficiency and minimize the cost of restoration, which is kind of an easy win. And then we have action 2, which is protect vulnerable critical infrastructure. So here we have including requirements for natural defenses and coastal building codes, for example, something like setbacks, proactively coordinating with JCUA and Jackson County cities to provide reliable, secure, and cost-effective drinking water and sanitary sewer, working collaboratively with JCUA and municipalities to establish and use common guidance for improving aging infrastructure to make sure that everyone across the county, regardless of kind of jurisdiction, is on the same page regarding guidance for improving that infrastructure. Integrating emerging compound flood risk data into infrastructure and development decision-making processes. Establish regular convenings with key industry partners to make sure that the protection of critical facility, to ensure the protection of critical facilities from erosion and flooding, preventing flooding and damage to critical flood-prone roads through elevation, armoring, or other strategies. And then we have an action dedicated to stormwater management. And these are kind of the high-level sub-actions, but under each of these there are actually kind of several different strategies and options, paths that the county can take, but maintain existing stormwater infrastructure, increase stormwater capacity. There are strategies for capturing water where it falls, reducing the impacts of stormwater on water quality, and then ensuring that new developments take a system-wide approach to stormwater infrastructure planning. Then we have an action about increasing power reliability. So this is focused on strengthening power infrastructure in coordination with utilities and municipalities, coordinating with businesses, parks, and other gathering places to increase power redundancy. And then for the resilient growth and development category, we have action 5, integrate resilient design measures into standards and codes for new and existing buildings. So this first one, implementing freeboard to protect residents in vulnerable areas from flood impacts. This would apply to like future development, not making everyone go back and do that. Strengthen building codes to meet the fortified gold standard. This one is still being tweaked a little bit, thinking about like what the county is actually capable of in this moment, and support residents with resilient home retrofits to align with codes. And there's lots of resources that we've identified with our local experts that already kind of exist for helping to implement some of these things. And then we have support increased funding for fortified roofing programs and increase awareness of fortified's capabilities, benefits, and alignment with county requirements. And then invest in fortified certification attainment for county building inspectors. Then we have an action around guiding growth in areas of lower risk that are well connected to infrastructure. One being implementing those cluster ordinances to support resilient development, which is, like I mentioned, the county is already pursuing. Providing education for local leaders about adaptive zoning practices to make sure that there's allowance for broader uses and facilitating more resilient development. Organizing an orientation for elected officials that includes resilient growth topics and leveraging groups that already do some of these trainings. So some of this stuff already exists, making sure that Jackson County's local leaders are benefiting from this information to help inform decision-making around resiliency. Supporting the construction of infrastructure in areas of lower risk, and then assessing opportunities for proactively laying master conduit. This one is still kind of up in the air too. We've had conversations with our utility partners, and so this one might be edited a bit to make sure that it's implementable. Action 7 is increase insurance affordability and availability. So we have increased the county's CRS rating. CRS is yes. Which I know, but I just had a brain moment. Thank you, Renee. Working with partners to translate risk reduction investments into premium reductions, and strategizing around how the county can play a role in shaping state and federal insurance policy and programs, which they're already doing, and you'll learn some of that in the plan if you're not already aware. Action 8 is educating residents about resilient building and maintenance practices. So connecting residents with the resources they need to support a more comprehensive understanding of risk and resilience, but also providing residents with actionable home maintenance information to strengthen, household resilience, providing education to the public on existing building codes as well. And then our third category, access to resources and services. We have an action around strengthening education and understanding of resiliency topics. So providing public education about key hazards, providing residents with specific community resource information about what's available before, during, and after disasters. And a lot of this already exists. It's like, where can we expand it is really kind of the key for this one. And then partnering with community organizations to distribute resiliency resources. So similar kind of sentiment there, getting the word out about a lot of things that kind of already exist. And then action 10, strengthen the capabilities of the county and community partners to support residents before, during, and after emergency events. So this is kind of a big one, but it's the last one. So sustaining disaster response and recovery coordination in between disasters, equipping community gathering spaces with post-disaster resources, supporting robust modes of transportation to foster resilience among residents, alleviate traffic congestion, diversify transportation options, especially for evacuations and emergency events specifically. We have a mental health action that is pending, so that we just wanted to make sure that folks knew that that's coming. The county has invested lots of resources in mental health recently, and we want to make sure that anything surrounding resiliency for that new facility is incorporated into this plan as well. Then we have developing and implementing differentiated resources and procedures for evacuation communications, coordinating with community organizations and partners to promote small business continuity planning and redundancy planning, and then coordinating with industry and the municipalities, the cities, to align planning for those acute shocks, those hazards that we mentioned at the beginning. So thinking about implementation, like how is this all gonna get done? Like I mentioned, not everything's gonna happen all at once. But the plan will outline, for the public's awareness, but also for implementers, so county leaders, but also, the partners that we identify as being key implementation partners, community organizations, and other folks that will support with implementing this plan. Each sub-action that you saw will have recommendations for implementation partners, an estimated relative cost. So is this something that costs, tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars? So kind of a rough order of magnitude cost, potential funding sources that the county can pursue, and then an estimated implementation timeframe. So is this something that we can implement probably in the near term, or is this something that really requires like a huge investment? We want to make sure that we're doing like a study on it first, and this might be a longer term action. So we'll differentiate between those. And then the reason why we have that, action areas map is because each action will also identify where in the county it might apply. So under each action, you'll see, okay, action, 2.1 applies obviously to the shoreline. Action, 5.5, I'm just making this up right now, but applies to this area and this area as guidance for implementation as well. And just to give you an idea of timeline here, so we are at the end. We are, I would say, probably about 85% done. We have a couple more iterations of the plan to go back and forth with the county on, and then we want to make sure the Board of Supervisors is able to review as well. So we'll deliver that final plan in about a month. And yeah, this is where we are in the timeline. And so I will pause there and just see if folks in the room specifically have questions before we kind of get up. And this is supposed to be flexible for the rest of the public meeting, so you're welcome to walk around, ask us questions about the actions, but we know that this is your Monday night, so thank you for listening to me for so long. And are there instructions for folks who might want to ask questions to come up? They need to come up to the microphone. These microphones? Great. Or Maggie can pass you one.
There you go.
Okay.
It's mostly for the live
Probably
stream.
don't need it. My voice. Okay. All of this sounds great. I mean, I've been doing environmental research for 40 years, so I'm more in the environmental end than worried about keeping businesses from getting flooded. I mean, I'm more about maintaining the environment. So from that perspective, but there's a lot of really cool things in here. I think they're very important. The problem is if the state, county, feds, cities don't make some of these things required for developers, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen because it costs money, and it's money out of their pocket. So is there any thought within this plan or subsequent plans of how you might change the codes to make it a bit more attainable, some of these things?
So I know the county is actually going through a code update right now. I don't know, Matthew, if there's anything else that you wanted to say around that, but I hear that sentiment because this is not a regulatory plan. Right?
Well, that's the point. I mean, it's all great and it's got good stuff in it, trust me, but if you can't implement it, regardless of the funding, and I know how funding goes for these kind of things, but just to have the codes in place so that if developer A wants to build a ginormous, we just fought this in Ocean Springs and won, and wants to build a big thing right next to a marsh, and they're going to put a concrete bulkhead in, who's going to stop them?
Well, I mean, yes, Abby mentioned it, and it's really good timing, luckily, but that the planning department is already in the process of having a unified development code written for the county that would sort of update and beef up the building codes for subdivisions and just, residential, all types of building. Basically in the county, and we are making recommendations and suggestions to those plan developers to help implement some of these things from this plan that would go towards more environmental protections. But at the same time, I mean, we have to always balance, environmental protections with allowing people to develop their land as it's zoned as well.
But
so.
Within the codes that allow the less negative impact to anything, whether it's flooding their place or, I mean, we had to get new insurance because Nationwide pulled out, and we had to take pictures of our pipes under our sink. We had to take pictures of the box because the house was built in '85 and the codes were not as good.
Right.
So, I mean, nationally, someone's looking at this. Mm-hmm. So at the county level or the city or state, whatever level makes these decisions, someone's got to think about, as we move forward, how do we make those more rigid and more environmentally good or
Right.
resource good?
Right.
But you've got all this old stuff out there that has to be somehow mitigated.
Right.
You've got houses in floodplains, but you can't do it today probably, but there's a lot of people that live in these kind of areas that, Moss Point, all the flooding that's been happening.
Right.
That's very hard to manage or
Yeah.
correct because it's all about money.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
It is weird to hold a microphone that you can't hear respond to you. I was just going to say that's also part of why you see the action areas, and I really encourage people to go look at those opportunity areas because they actually deal with the fact that you've got different types of existing infrastructure growth and homes in different areas, and it explicitly thinks about not just stormwater as an issue, but how is stormwater an issue in these already really built out, more urban areas versus how is it an issue in these more rural areas and everything in between.
Good evening. My name is Sean Lowry. I live in Bellefontaine Beach, which is in coastal Jackson County, in between Gaucher and Ocean Springs. I just wanted to say thank you to Jackson County and to Neil Schaefer for all the work that's gone into this plan. I know it's been a huge effort. Matthew briefed almost a year's process, and thanks for the workshops that led up to this. I think I've got an easy question for you. Of your 10 points here, is there a prioritization of those points, or not, are they not necessarily in a priority order?
So I would say as they exist right now, they are not in priority order. They're more just categorized. But I would say that the way that they'll be reflected in the plan is, how are they going to be most feasibly implemented? Is it in the near term or is it in the longer term? And thinking about like 1 to 3 years versus later down the line, maybe like 5 to 8 years. But in terms of prioritization, I think, Matthew, you might be able to speak to this better than I can, but I think a lot of it depends on what resources become available first.
I would say that's accurate. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Gail Bishop. I'm a retired person, but I'm just curious. I think you mentioned that 15% of the funding you received went into the report. Well, how much is left? Can any of those funds go into implementation of what is decided?
Yes, that 15%, I can't remember the exact dollar amount, but I want to say it was like around 2.3, 2.4 million is the total of that mitigation effort portion. And it's, you know, a lot of work that goes into these plans. I didn't give much details on it earlier when I said, you know, describing the funding source, but we're also along the same timeline implementing 3 separate watershed management plans for the watersheds that all touch and connect around the Moss Point area as well. So those plans will have much more like detailed location-specific recommendations on how to improve the drainage systems in those areas, and then other like non-structural elements to those plans as well. Things that could help, you know, educate people about the water quality issues in their watersheds that they live in, and those types of things. And so there's going to be around $500,000 for this resiliency plan, and then another 500 or so for the watershed management plans. Roughly, it could vary a little bit more from that, but that amount will be used to implement either, like we mentioned earlier, some type of pilot construction project, or other type of project that could go towards, you know, maybe a shoreline project or some power redundancy project. So we haven't decided that, but yes, to answer your question, there is going to be that amount of funding left over to keep this, at least get the first step of it started. Right, and I'm really happy about that too, because that was, you know, the main, one of the main hearts of this plan. It's hard to, you know, pick one in particularly, but one of my passions has always been trying to improve and stabilize the shorelines, just because I see, you know, the detriment that some of it sees, especially when people live right next to it. So yes, it's very good timing on that as well, and fortunate that we were able to receive that funding to go towards a feasibility study that will actually look at those specific areas on the coastline and identify projects that could solve those problems, or at least, you know, help with mitigating them, and then pick out which of those projects would be the best fit for each location too. Right. And so, yeah, we were only fortunate to get that funding because we were in the process of this plan already. So, and that funding source, is it NOAA? NFWF, sorry. NFWF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, or I forget what the last F is, but National Fish and Wildlife. They like to fund projects and plans that sort of follow along in a natural progression from, you know, being identified in a plan, feasibility study, then, you know, engineering and design of those projects, and then finally into the construction of those projects. So the fact that we're starting early in on that process with them gives me hope that we'll, you know, hopefully continue along with that path and get, you know, some good funding for those types of projects. Sure. Yeah. I mean, we are fortunate to receive a healthy amount of funding. We get our own share of GOMESA funds, which are Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act funds, which basically is a law that makes the industries and the companies that harvest and get the oil and natural gas from the Gulf of Mexico, they have to share a portion of their revenues with the Gulf states and with the Gulf counties. And so we get our own direct share of that revenue each year that allows us to do coastal restoration projects and other types of projects like that. There's always, or in the past, there have been FEMA funds available to help us recover after hurricanes. That's traditionally been a good source. We get each year from the state Tidelands funds to help with our boating facilities and things, piers that help people get access to the water. To enjoy those resources. So there are a lot of funding sources that we take advantage of now. And like I said, we're fortunate to get a good share of those to help us do some of these good projects that we're trying to do. Sure, yeah, and this is Randy Bosarge, District 5 Supervisor.
I think most everybody knows me. As we apply for these funds, these programs like this help facilitate applying for those funds. So the reason why we're doing the outreaches like today, and we've got several other ones to do throughout the county with Neal Schaefer over the next month or so, and so we're able to use these not only with your input. Your input is very valuable. We all of us in this room, we need your input to help us come up with ideas and solutions to some of our issues. This is a project that the Board of Supervisors took on about 8 years ago. We hired a company to do a comprehensive drainage plan for the whole county, and we spent about $500,000 on that. And then so that drainage plan is now going into the resiliency plan to help get this thing off the ground, so to say. The thing that stresses me out about this job the most is all the red tape and everything you got to do to get to an actual project. So luckily we've got a great board. We've got some great people in our county administrator's office that sees what we're needing to do, and we get out, we get ahead of this, and we come up with a plan, and then we go after this funding. I think we're probably further ahead than anybody is as far as what we're doing here today. So once we get through these series of public inputs, we'll take everybody's information and we'll start working with it and figuring out which funding source, because there's multiple funding sources. So we'll figure out which one we can go to for particular projects, and then identify those and go get the funding for them. So I just want to thank everybody for being here tonight. And as far as fortified construction goes, so what's fixing to happen is, and I don't mean to scare anybody here, but I can tell you that the insurance companies, home insurance, wind, whatever, flood, they're always looking for a reason to either go up on your rates or not write any insurance at all. So now they've come up through the state insurance commissioner's office. Now they want everybody on the coast to be what's called a fortified gold. So now they're saying that, unless you start requiring fortified gold construction, we're probably not going to write, as many policies anymore. So like I said, they're always looking for a reason either to go up on your rates or not write a policy. So the county is going to get ahead of this through our planning department, and we're going to start working on a fortified program for new construction and also to retrofit existing homes. Because a lot of your existing homes, just like you said, are older homes and they're having a hard time finding insurance. Now, as far as the floodplain goes, the only way you're going to get up above the BFE, you're going to have to raise your house. And I don't know of any funds available to do that. But I do know in the legislature, they've got a bill right now that would allow the insurance commissioner it's probably not enough. It's enough to get started, about $1.5 million to start. The average cost to mitigate your roof, which is your most costly part of your home as far as hurricane storm damage goes, because if the shingles peel off or the metal roof peels off, you've got more damage inside the house from water than you do fixing the roof. So if we mitigate the roofs, their ideas is that it'll lessen the impact or the cost of the inside of the house if it was to get damaged. So they're going to look at starting about a $5,000 a house grant if you qualify. I don't know what the qualifications are yet, but it'll be a grant that will allow you to bring your roof up to fortified gold standards, and then that way you would take that certificate and give that to the insurance company, and hopefully they would lower your rates. Now, or not raise them. Heck, if they just not raise my rates, I'd be great. You know, I know the rates will probably never get lowered, but if they would just leave them alone with the fortified certificates, I'd be happy. So, but new construction, what we're trying to do, because we are seeing, you know, a boom in housing, and so we're trying to get the new construction to all fortified gold construction. So if that's the case, then that lessens the risk for the insurance companies, and hopefully they'll be reasonable on their rates. And you got to remember, in Mississippi, we don't have as many homes as an Alabama Gulf Coast or a Florida Gulf Coast or even a Louisiana Gulf Coast. So our risk is higher. That's why our premiums are a little higher. But as we grow and we get these fortified programs in place, then we're one step ahead of trying to take what we have and make it less expensive. So anyway, I just wanted to thank everybody for being here tonight. Please give, you know, online folks, if you're online, please send your questions in, your ideas. We need them, and you know, we'll do what we can to make everything nice. Thank y'all.
Neil Schaefer has a hyphen.
All right. Well, yeah, I guess if there's no other direct questions, y'all feel free to, you know, take a look at the boards, and if you want to speak to any of us directly again, feel free to do that as well.